Good evening, everybody. On behalf of the team of Calcutta Comparatists 1919, I have been granted the honor to welcome you to today's webinar. Calcutta Comparatists 1919 is an independent forum for research scholars of humanities and social sciences. It carries the legacy of academic space for literary comparison between the Indian languages initiated in 1919. It's a platform for sharing and discussing research interests and ideas. We are organizing online lectures on various interdisciplinary topics to be delivered by academicians and distinguished research scholars of different fields. Your remarkable skills, insights, and knowledge will be a valuable addition to our team. We look forward to a mutually beneficial relationship with everyone in this horizon. The topic for today's discussion is gender politics in queer spectrum and Indian cinematic representation. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Our revered guests for the day are Ms. Medhashree Talapatra and Mr. Samman Roy. Ms. Medhashree Talapatra is an assistant professor in the Department of English at the Techno India University, main campus, Salt Lake. She also is a Ph.D. research scholar at the Department of Film Studies at Jadavpur University. She has finished her graduation from Bethune College, Kolkata, and her master's and MPhil from the Department of English, University of Calcutta. She has been a rank holder in both her graduation and post-graduation, and even the highest scorer during her MPhil days. Her areas of interest cover gender studies, post-colonial studies, and modernism and postmodernism. Mr. Samman Roy, on the other hand, is an independent film director who started out with a Mumbai-based production house, TVF, with art direction. Over the past 4 years, he has directed several short films which have traveled to multiple film festivals and are currently streaming on Bengali OTT platforms like Hoichoi and other times. He has also directed several music videos that are streaming on platforms like Hangama and Z Music and advertisements for reputed companies. Mr. Roy is currently working as a faculty at the Media Science Department at Maulana Abul Kalam Azad University of Technology and also running a film appreciation channel on YouTube called Cinematel. Now, I would like to request Ms. Medhashree Talapatra to share her insight with us. Thank you.
Thank you for that lovely welcome. I am extremely indebted to the entire team of Calcutta Comparatists for providing me with a platform, for providing me with an opportunity. And yes, before I begin, I would like to begin with a clarification. My name is not Medhasree, my name is Medhasree. So, yeah, having said that, the topic that I have selected for today is, well, it is not exactly something even I would consider it to be an area of expertise, but it is definitely an area of interest. So if there are errors, which I'm sure there are, please let me know so that I can do better. Also, this is my very first presentation, so I'm a little bit nervous as it is probably visible. Right. So, without any further delay, I would like to begin the session with the presentation if I can get it on. Right. Okay, is the presentation visible? Can anyone please let me know? I am still a novice at this.
Yes, it's
Yes, it's
visible.
visible.
Yeah, it's visible. Yeah.
All right. So the title of my paper is Gender Politics in the Queer Spectrum and Indian Cinematic Representation. So let me just quickly discuss a little bit about why I chose this topic. Now, when we're talking about gender, gender does not hold a binary classification anymore. And even though gender has branched out, and I'm not even going to go into the branches that we talk about these days, but I would just like to um, share one thing, that even within the spectrum of homosexuality, we still have politics, even if we consider homosexuality through terms of binary, that is gay and lesbian. Perhaps this title might be a little bit misleading for some people, but that is what I mean by the title when I say this. Now, an Indian cinematic representation. For my paper today, I have selected three separate films spanning three separate decades. The first film that I have selected is Fire, which was released in 1996 and was directed by Deepa Mehta. The second film in question is probably a very, very less known film. It's called Girlfriend, and it was directed by Karan Rasthan, and it was released in 2004. And the last film for discussion is Ek Ladki Ko Dekha To Aisa Laga, which was released very recently in 2019 and is directed by Shelly Chopra Dhar. Right. So let me begin by let me just begin the paper. Now, as far as sexuality has been of any concern in India, if we ponder over the accepted dominant understandings of sexuality, it can almost be perceived through a lens of binary opposition of heterosexuality that remains till date a celebrated taboo, and homosexuality, which even after the demolition of the infamous Article 377, it remains a matter of hushed abnormality that should find a cure. Now, according to Judith Butler in Gender Trouble, and I feel like every webinar that you attend on gender would definitely have some mention of Butler. She's indispensable. So in Gender Trouble, Judith Butler said that gender always operated as a regulatory construct that pits heterosexuality against homosexuality, and on grounds of norms, heterosexuality, of course, emerges victorious. For Butler, gender is a performative effect of reiterative acts. So to simplify this would mean sex and gender are both constructs for the proper functioning of family producing and lineage extending heterosexuality. This is especially true for India, where the portrayal, or rather the perfect portrayal of family, is presented through the repeated enforcement by mainstream media that comprises the Malthusian couple and their children and grandchildren and perhaps even great-grandchildren, all on their way to becoming the perfect representative of the heterosexual family being. Now, the first slide has this very, very famous quote by Butler. It says that the very concept of sex as a matter, as instrument of cultural signification, however, is a discursive formation that acts as a naturalized foundation and the strategies of domination that distinction supports. The binary relation between culture and nature promotes a relationship of hierarchy in which culture freely imposes meaning on nature and hence renders it into an other to be appropriated into its own limitless uses. Now, historically, if we look at the position of Indian women, we would find that they have always been garbed in a maternal light. She's the ideal daughter, she's the ideal wife and mother. Manu said, and India believed, that women are the responsibility of men from her birth till her death. And Vatsayana, in his Kama Sutra, upheld staunchly the values that segregates the good woman from the common whore, and thereby clearly mentioned the sexual acts which are permissible with the whore but never with the wife. Hence, as far as history is concerned, women of India have had their own very definition of an angel in the house or the mad woman in the attic. She could either happily adhere to the patriarchal dictums of femininity that was reinforced and injected into the minds of Indians. And this increased manifolds since the latter half of the 1990s through what we popularly call the Saas Bahu daily serials, or so she could either be the very, very pious woman who is looking after her family, or she could be the vamp. Now, there's an interesting thing about these vamps that they showcased modern, educated women, often dressed in Western wear, and to some extent, they are knowledgeable about their sexual desire. However, all of these women that we are talking about, they are inherently heterosexual, and they would always be pining for a man sometimes, and as it is very well known and lauded and even laughed at, that multiple women pining for a single man. So thus in the media depiction, there was no question for the women of the other disposition, a woman who wants another woman, a woman loving or lusting for another woman's body. Because the question of body in itself does not arise or give rise to complications in Indian media, as it is actually non-existent unless used for titillating the male gaze into further objectification of the semi-naked woman on screen, readily available to satiate their real or simulated lust. However, feeble attempts have been made to comprehend the nature of the other woman, the one who desires another of her gender, the one who does not wish to solidify her identity as the second citizen in the sex identity dialectics. So here I have attempted to look at these dialectics through these films, and I shall begin with Fire. Now, Fire, it was released in 1996, and it had created a huge uproar, a very big ruckus upon its release. And till a long time afterwards, the DVD of the film was marketed as being banned in India, even though it was not. It wasn't actually banned in India, but the DVD in America has always been marketed as being banned in India. Needless to say, this created an aura of foreboding anticipation around the film. The film is set in the bustling streets of Old Delhi. The film narrates the journey of two sisters-in-law, that is Sita, who in the Hindi movie, because the censor board wanted it, her name was changed to Neeta for very obvious reason. So Sita, who through an arranged marriage, she becomes Jatin's wife, and she moves in with her in-laws and their family servant. The family that she moves into, it comprises the matriarch of the household, whom they call BG. Now, BG has suffered a stroke and is now paralytic mute, and she still has all her senses working, except that she cannot speak or move about. The family also comprises Jatin's elder brother Ashok and his wife Radha, their family servant Mundu. Now, the film moves at a very languorous pace. It moves very slowly, and it narrates the unhappy domestic relationships of these two women with their respective husbands, which leads them to form an unlikely camaraderie. Now, notable film critic Peter Shack, he has this article called Fire Has Spark But Not Enough Heat. He has said that Fire, it moves at a deliberate pace. It is almost like a tease in the light of the romance promised by the title. Though accomplished and wrought with an unwavering intimacy, the story is specific to middle-class India in its focus on the lives of beautiful sisters-in-law Radha and Sita trapped in miserable marriages and living under the same roof. Now, the film, when it begins, we find that it commences at Taj Mahal, where the newlyweds, Jatin and Sita, have gone for their honeymoon. We see a detached Jatin, a persistent Sita. They are trying to have her have a conversation, and this woman, this poor woman, who doesn't know whom she has married, she's trying to understand the situation that she has, got herself in for her entire life. So they barely talk, and the marriage is obviously not consummated during the honeymoon period. It is only after that they come back to Delhi, and after the audience is acquainted with Jatin's Chinese girlfriend Julie, who never really wanted to marry Jatin, but he's obsessed with her nevertheless. Then we find that a lot of things simultaneously happen. Jatin wants his wife to be clad in mini skirts and really modern Western wear that he's accustomed to seeing his girlfriend in. Now, what happens here is, you see, Sangeeta Datta says that women in Bollywood, they serve to maintain male domination through a patriarchal version of female sexuality based on a conservative ideology. So the woman is always existing in mainstream media and even in alternate media, any forms of media, because she's the objective of the gaze, of the male gaze. Now, even Laura Mulvey's theory of gaze, that the woman is placed on the pedestal of being an object of avid sexual desire through the male gaze. So this small instance also aligns with the man asking the woman to objectify herself for a voyeuristic sex. Now, when the marriage is finally consummated, Mehta brilliantly depicts that there is no romance. As it is usually in the case of most arranged marriages, there is no romance. No love in the act of lovemaking. Because it is not done for the sake of lovemaking, it is done for the sake of reproduction. That you have married, now you must reproduce. You must carry the family line forward. Jatin asks Sita to check if there is blood on the bed sheet, and this, I felt that this was very important now, because this scene, is a reinforcement of an age-old belief that marriage should take place between a man and a woman who is exclusively a virgin. In India, even today, there is this practice, especially in the rural areas, that after the first night, elderly women, they go and check the bed sheet for blood stains to see if they have brought home a fresh woman or a soiled one, a used one. And Sita is absolutely horrified to see the blood stain. She frantically starts scrubbing it. And this does two things simultaneously. It scares her of her own body, as it is common with women to be in fear of their own women's body. Also, it imposes feelings of vulnerability and humiliation that sex always has, especially, it has been conditioned in the minds of women since childhood, especially Indian women, especially middle-class Indian women. Now, if we find that this is Sita's condition, then Radha's condition, that is Shabana Azmi, it's even more abysmal. She is infertile. She had had treatments done, and her doctor had very politely let her know that she does not have any eggs in her ovaries. In fact, this is exactly what he said: no eggs in ovaries, madam. And when the doctor said this, it not only ended her desire to be a mother, a role that every woman is believed that they must, every woman is born so that they can be a mother. So that flies right out of the window. And it also ends all physical love that had hitherto existed between her and her husband. Her husband believes that it must be a consequence of his karma, that his wife is incapable of having a child, and he is incapable of fulfilling his familial duties. So he renounces desire, his sexual duty to his wife, and he becomes a devotee to a local Swamiji. This Swamiji, he teaches his disciples that all bodily desire should be renounced because desire is equated with the devil. Now, however, he also makes his disciples undergo this very unnatural and almost horrid practice. So Ashok makes his wife lie beside him night after night whenever he feels a surge of desire, and he never touches her. Finally, one day, Radha asks him, what does she gain from this? This lying and this constant act of abstinence, what is she gaining from this? And Ashok seems frazzled and he says, she's only nearly doing her wifely duties. Now, this notion of wifely duties, it acts as a refrain throughout the course of the film. There is a lot of discursive practice on who is an ideal wife and how much she always willingly subjugate herself. So the parallel narrative of the enactment of Ram Leela. So there are scene after scene where we have these scenes from Ram Leela thrown in. Most of it deals with that one particular scene of Agni Pariksha. It solidifies the age-old notion of womanly purity, chastity, and devotion to the husband through the trope of Sita and, like I said, the Agni Pariksha. This refrain of what constitutes to be a wifely duty brings forth a very, very important question. Do women have desires that can be validated, or the simple desire for the validation of the desire removes her from the pedestal of the virtuous, pious woman and turns her into a commodifiable whore? In the scene where the two women, there is a scene where the two women are on the roof and a marriage procession passes by and Sita says, once again, someone is getting married. And Radha says, yes, once more. Now, these two lines, just through these two lines, Mehta institutionalizes marriage as bearers of shackles that uses domesticity to shackle women, from which freedom comes only in the form of funeral pyre. Now, I do not really mention the less gruesome alternative of divorce because even though, now the stigma associated with divorce, I should say, has lessened, but there is still a stigma of being a divorcee. Not a male divorcee, but a female divorcee, because it puts the woman in a precarious position of being a no man's woman, thus becoming readily available for all men, as is the usual notion of patriarchy. So in the very first scene of physical intimacy between these two women that we find, the first kiss, it depicts a sheer moment of cadence, and it also happens accidentally. These women do not know what has just happened, and they are extremely surprised because it is in stark contrast to their usual sexual experiences. Because we see in scene after scene that, Sita undergoes forced penetration almost. She does not obviously enjoy it. It almost feels like a chore to her. Because if it doesn't, then that means that there would be a delay in her getting pregnant. And she needs to get pregnant as soon as possible because Ashok does not have children. And Radha, she immediately moves away because that one kiss thoughts and jeopardizes her balance as a heteronormative woman, and her entire identity is overthrown. Now, their eventual lovemaking that we find is a slow and sensuous act of exploration that is repeatedly juxtaposed with the animalistic swinging back and forth of the man's pelvis. Yet, as she hurriedly leaves and looks at herself in the mirror, she delicately touches her own lips. This symbolizes locating the latent power of expression. This scene, even though garbed in innocence of discovery of one's own body, rather expression of desire, is not far from being problematic. The entire film is in fact quite problematic if it really needs to be analyzed. The entire relationship of Sita and Radha in the film, which progresses very quickly to lovemaking and the discovery of which serves as the ultimate climax, is based on the premise that unfulfilled heterosexual experiences can only propel women to engage in lesbian relationships, and thus it negates the very existence of homosexual identity and its subsequent history and struggles. This is also disturbing as it endeavors to desexualize and thus negate the very same-sex relationship. The film also depicts flashbacks of Radha's childhood, which is symbolic of searching for freedom and her true self, and it seems to find some fruition in this scene. There is another scene where these women are oiling each other's hair. The stark contrast of white versus black, where white symbolizes a knowledge towards desire, and perhaps black, the ardent desire to suppress that desire. The entire film rocks back and forth between female desire and patriarchal devices to subvert it, and the woman's own desire to adhere to it. Women are usually seen as flag bearers of tradition and being within the threshold because the honor of the family rests with them, as is reinforced. Um, there is a beautiful monologue that we have in the during the Karwa Chauth scene. I have not included that because of my very poor skills as a translator. So here we have a meta-narrative, and through this meta-narrative, and I'm sure that everyone in the audience has already seen this one, so they would be able to understand when I refer to this meta-narrative. Now, what is being clearly done is to assert a woman's body and a woman's life. If she has an identity, then that identity must be revolving constantly around her husband, because she needs to prove to the society, which has also conditioned her to believe likewise. So her gendered presence is only with allegiance with the male presence. When Radha asks Sita if she is hungry in the evening of Karwa Chauth, she replies that she is thirsty, thus emanating her desire that she finds no reason to camouflage from within from Radha herself. Radha makes Sita drink the water from her own hands, a ritual which is reserved for the husband. Now, this once again does two things simultaneously. This becomes the prelude to their ultimate union, and at the same time does not quite break the structure of patriarchy, which posits that there must exist a substantial relationship for sexual unity to occur. So even when the union does indeed occur, interestingly, it is Sita who says the first line after they make love is, "Have we done something wrong? हमने कुछ गलत तो नहीं किया?" And it is Radha who is assuring her. Okay. Could you please just 1 minute excuse me? I'm terribly sorry. I'm terribly, terribly sorry for that interruption. Okay. Now, okay. So what happens in fire is that if on the one hand, it draws a tale of claustrophobia that these women strive to escape from and find a means of expression, it also bluntly depicts the age-old truth that women must be monitored, conscripted, and chastised, and it must be done through her own body. Now, however, it is not blatant suppression that exists within women, but also men within patriarchal hypocrisy. There are enough sexual overtones hinted at repeatedly between Swami and Ashok, and which is completely shunned. It is always shunned. Hence, it is not just female desire, but homoerotic desire that lurk in men that must be completely bypassed in order for patriarchy to thrive. Slowly, with the movement of the film, disobedience in the women, which according to the text of this film, emerges as a consequence of their thriving homosexuality, is palpable. Sita and Radha dance in front of BG, and Sita is the more assertive one in the masculine clothing, because is it not the man who must always be the assertive one, the one who must always take charge? This is what Freud termed masculinity complex, and it is of common knowledge that Freud was of the opinion that if the woman was not willing enough to meet her biological destiny um, of, of embracing femininity, because she is deprived of a penis, then she must either be frigid or she must be a deviant, that is a homosexual. In case of Sita, it seems to be both. In her copulation with Jatin, she is extremely frigid and insecure and unsure, while when she's with Radha, she's clearly the more commanding one, the man in the dynamics. This is a scene which in Masi linguistic discourse must be considered to be somewhat bold, as it does not titillate the male gaze nor provokes the libidinal gaze, but secures a path to an existence which is primarily female. Is it appropriated? We find the answer to it from Mundu, who says, too much electricity between these women. Now, Marjorie Baumgarten, she remarked that fire becomes a tale of two women who find solace in same-sex relationship, thus subverting the narrowness hitherto imposed on them. And this is even more visible as the union takes place in Radha's bed and especially in her room that she shares with her husband. There are allusions scattered throughout the film which contrast male sexuality against female sexuality in order to create a proper binary. How black pepper is used to make grooms perform better on their wedding night. Sex once again becomes performance, since the male is the dominant, active, and acting figure in the act of copulation. The woman, however, is given a green cardamom, the smell of which is said to entice the groom. The contrast shows that women must entice because they, after all, are the passive forces lying on their backs, allowing the act. If the woman actively decides to be a participant, her experience is questioned as promiscuity. She must be silenced. Her sexual hysteria must be silenced. The woman's finding each other is a sexual awakening that visibly disrupts the balance so well preserved that the power of design lies with the man in a scene where Jatin tells Sita that she could go away, she could leave him, but then that would mean that she would become a divorcee, and there's enough stigma associated with that. The woman always resides in the margins, and in the margins is where she should be. The Indian dictums of patriarchal well-balance is preserved through the reinforced refrain that a woman is of value if she has children, and it is the men who can be easily pardoned for their lust and their blunt display of it, because men will be men. There is a very poignant scene where Mundu is caught watching and masturbating to pornography in front of the old matriarch of the family, but he's left off with a warning. Because he's a man, he has desires that need to be met, so it's all right for him to do that. But for women, desire is equated to devil worship. It is a sin, it must be stopped. This film cannot really be called a mouthpiece of lesbian cinema or queer cinema, mainly because it portrays man-woman relationship, only out of which can emerge woman-woman relationship. Now, there are several motives which run through the film which further emphasizes its lit motive. If we read the text of the film, we are made aware of these two locations, that men will always be on the outside, as is the norm with patriarchy, the women inside. The women seem to be within domesticated barriers. When these women are shown to be outside there in the market or at the dargah of Nizamuddin, that one scene of the family outing impresses that to venture farther from home is not possible without male protection. Another image that runs throughout the course of the film is that one scene or episode from the Ramayana where Sita has to undergo self-immolation. A woman trying to provide proof to the world that she is chaste, that her body has not been tainted, it still belongs to her Swami, her husband. So, in the final scene of discovery, where the man crosses the boundary and enters into a realm of an almost exclusive female existence that does not fall under the purview of his knowledge and is guided by his penile supremacy, and the peeping in through the door becomes a violation of not privacy but of the private space. Now, Ashok, when he finds out about it, he accuses Radha, his physical imposition on her, the violent kisses, all become symbol of ravishment, entrapment of the woman through bodily chastisement, once again a prominent motive. We are reminded of Jatin, who slaps Sita, and when Sita slaps back, he is aroused and he kisses her back. Marital rape is unheard of and seldom reported as a crime, because if you are married, then how can it be a crime? What is consent? Who has even heard about that word? So when finally we find that Radha's sari has caught fire, Ashok leaves with his paralyzed mother, who even condition is still a perpetrator of patriarchy, because the camera focuses on her and you can see a smirk on that woman's face. She's clearly very happy that, okay, let this debauched woman die, because she's not someone's wife anymore. She's not the bahu of the family. What she is a woman who has known desire, who has had a sexual awakening. So she's not a respectable woman. She's but a common whore. And a whore has no value because she voluntarily commodifies her body in lieu of monetary gain. And a body which knows its value, that body is dangerous. The film ends with Radha managing to escape the fire. And this fire, this fire has often been looked as it almost becomes symbolic of the kitchen fires that were very, very in vogue back in the day, that women would die mysteriously, and even though these were cases of homicides, they would just merely be written off as accidents. And the film incorporates that. So when the film ends with Radha managing to escape the fire, albeit in burnt clothes and in a disheveled state, she joins Sita at the dargah. Now, for a lot of critics, the dargah symbolically proved to be confusing, as it seemed like breaking away from the shackles of Hindu patriarchy and finding solace in another religion altogether. But here, I personally believe that the dargah does not really possess a religious connotation. It serves more like a third space. I would just like to read out Edward Soja's quotation on it. I should have included that in the PPT. I realize that now. So Edward Soja defines the third space as where everything comes together. Subjectivity and objectivity, the abstract and the concrete, the real and the imagined, the mind and the body, the conscious and the unconscious, the disciplined and the transdisciplinary, everyday life and unending history. Yet, the film ends on a sudden note without proper resolution. How does these two women live? There is no answer that is given. And there might be a very good explanation for that, and it is not only associated with the art and aesthetic of the film, but overall the extremely didactic society that India has had, and especially when the film was released. Now, a lot of films we can find that which especially shows women and women in prominent roles and which deal with women's sexuality, they end without a proper resolution of conflict, like Parsht, which was directed by Leena Yadav, or Lipstick Under My Burqa. Mainly, because these all of these films seem to end abruptly, mainly because when it comes to women's issues, there is no consolidated resolution. It is an ever-growing process. Here, the conflict is perhaps even more crucial because it is a part of an ongoing, broader ideological struggle about what is Indian and what is not. How far is homosexuality excluded? Fire then becomes more than just a film showcasing homosexual relations. It endeavors to showcase the marginalized woman who is bereft of a voice and identity, both sexual and humane. The characters seem to let go of their biological destiny of being the passive, masochistic woman who must always condone willingly the impositions of patriarchal structure and dictums, because they have been trained as a potential chalice to carry forward the family in which they have been married. The pain of abstinence, which we find Radha has been suffering for a long 15 years, is only an endeavor to become a good wife. And it is rooted in that feminine masochism that psychoanalysts they keep referring to again and again, that women have this inherent desire to be tortured, to be beaten, to be used. So this is subverted, especially during that climax where Radha actually makes an active effort to save herself from the fire. Now, okay, before I continue, am I okay for time or should I stop? Because I still have two more films that I wanted to talk about. Can anyone please tell me if I should am I okay for
Yes,
time?
yes, Medhashree, you can continue. No
Okay,
issues.
okay. Okay, but no, because Protim had told me that I had till 7:45, and it's a little past
No,
that.
it's okay. You can continue. You can continue.
Okay. Thank you. Right. So coming back now, like I have already said, that when the film was released, it had amassed ample controversy, and it is still widely seen as a film which is still controversial. Even now, Fire is only watched by a niche audience. It's not, and even if it is watched by a broader audience, it is simply those particular lovemaking scenes. Because to the massy audience, back then and even till now, it was nothing better than soft lesbian porn, which has been included in a family drama. So, what the women went through would not gather sympathy from the crowds, because it is socially accepted that this is by and large what most women go through in their homes, and it's absolutely fine. This has always prevailed. This should always prevail. Why are you making a big deal of it, you being Mehta? That was the question that was raised, that women have always undergone such things at their in-laws. This is not a big deal. But this loneliness, this endeavor of showcasing the loneliness and the struggle of these two Indian women, what Mehta did, of course she does this beautifully, but what she did was, perhaps unknowingly, she made lesbianism invisible. The same-sex relationship that is a very natural, organic process that people who find comfort in people belonging to their same sex, it does not arise out of a special circumstance. What I'm trying to say is that she made lesbianism completely invisible, even though it deserves to have a place in the center without being relegated into the margin. Mehta in this film seems to play along the same trope that Simone de Beauvoir said, that one is not born but rather becomes a woman. Instead, here it seems to be that one is not born to be homosexual, but it is only futile, pleasureless, heterosexual union which compelled them to seek solace in another woman's arms. This produces two reverse effects. It depoliticizes the very notion of pluralism associated with sexuality of the spectrum because it binarizes it. It also concretely de-gays a union and tries to consolidate it within the patriarchal structure of love, whereas the very foundation of sexual identity seem to arise out of being unsure of a consolidated identity, that is, a de-specification. Lucy Irigaray had specifically pointed out that women do not have a sex. They have at least two, and that in itself is a bare minimum definition. In Deepa Mehta's Fire, then it becomes an avid denial of de-specified lesbian pluralistic identity by almost making it a culturally constructed symbol of the deviant, neglected, almost subaltern woman who is marginalized and voiceless, but their act of deconstructing or adhering to their own notions of sexuality also seems to be cultural performative fiction. So now finally we come to the next film, which is Girlfriend. I'm sure that a lot of people do not know about this film, and rightly so. Not a lot has ever been said about this film, and for very good reason. The film was a failure at the box office when it was released. It does not boast of a superlative star cast, and it is basically what is called a B-grade Hindi film. But at that point of time, it still tried to do something and failed. Before I begin, I should just say that. Now, Girlfriend, it tells the story of two women. Okay, they're best friends. They stay together in an almost idyllic atmosphere. They do not want to let men invade their private space, apart from gay men whom they consider to be one of their own. So Tania, which is played by Isha Kopikar in the picture, she's the woman in black, and Sapna is the woman in red, which was played by Amrita Arora. I'm sure that a lot of the audience member might not even know these actresses. I hope they do, but in case. So Tania, who was played by Isha, is clearly the masculine presence in the relationship, except the filmmakers decided to take it a notch higher and make her a man who is stuck in a woman's body and is happy to be negating her constructed biological identity, but she is very happy with her femininity and she does not quite want to be a man. So they clearly did not know what they wanted to do with the character, except that she has a very traumatic backstory. She's strong, she's adept at kickboxing, and she's barred. She has every bit of femininity to be the object of desire, but she deliberately chooses not to be. And this deliberation actually lands as the other of truth without the truth. Now, Sapna, on the other hand, is the woman in the dynamics. She's feminine, she's weak, she is the thorough representation of the damsel in distress who needs to be protected and looked after and cared for always. The story is as simple as it gets. Tania is in love with Sapna. Sapna does not realize that this love has undertones of overt sexuality and only considers this to be the sacred sororal bonds that exist between best friends, even though it is revealed during the course of the film that they have had sexual relations in the past, albeit drunken ones. Rahul, the hero of the film, he sees Sapna at a party, falls in love, pursues her relentlessly. They begin a relationship which incurs the wrath of Tania, and she endeavors repeatedly to create rifts between the happy couple, even beating Rahul to a pulp quite literally. And finally, in the climax, she reveals that she's a lesbian, goes to kill Rahul, but Sapna intervenes and Tania dies of gruesome death. It's pretty stereotypical. But the story is, of course, problematic, extremely problematic, and there is hardly any saving grace. The film concludes with Rahul and Sapna, who are hopefully married by now. They are leaving flowers at Tania's grave and walking away hand in hand. From the very beginning, a dichotomy is maintained. The world of men versus the world of women, and I think this is very clearly maintained across all the films that I am discussing. The world of men here, it is tainted with brutality, dishonesty, corruption. The women must indeed protect their own innocence, being on their guard. They must be constantly vigilant. Rahul is the typical macho hero. He is homophobic and a gentleman. He terrorizes and mimics this man called Jojo, who is a gay man, for being an openly gay man. Then he pretends to be Jojo's boyfriend because he needs to get close to this girl that he has fallen head over heels in love with, Sapna. And then when he has to prove that he's heterosexual, all that he needs to say to this girl is, "Ladke ladko se pyar nahi karte, ladkiyon se karte hain." Men do not love men, they love women, only women. Rahul seems to be disgruntled between the existing friendship between these two women, being aware of its overt sexual undertones, and repeatedly talks about the abnormality of their friendship and accuses that they must indulge in despicable actions at night under covers. In a flashback sequence, we find that in a drunken stupor, they did engage in sex. However, the entire act is unnecessarily lascivious, farcical. It borders on pornography, which is not really surprising because Girlfriend, when it was released, it was marketed as a titillating film. In the act, we also find some subtle notes of resistance from Sapna, and the entire scene becomes an immaculate representation, although it seems farcical, but it still feels like an immaculate representation of date rape induced by drugs and alcohol. In the morning, Sapna is revulsed, and Tanya normalizes the entire situation, saying that whatever has happened as a consequence of alcohol and drugs. And since they do not even have much memory of it to begin with, what does it matter anyway? And Sapna is happy with it, so they let bygones be bygone. Soon everything is forgotten and right between them. The film progresses merely for the sake of it, and when Rahul proposes marriage to Sapna, she happily agrees. And Tanya does everything in her power to hinder that. The film hints from the very opening scene that Tanya must have been a victim of gruesome sexual violence to possess such deviance, and it is soon brought into light when we are told that she was repeatedly raped by her neighbor as a child. So she grows up to hate men, she considers them to be destructive and a necessary evil, and she can only love women whom she thinks that women need to be saved from the demons that are men. Interestingly, this is also extremely stereotypical because most of lesbian pornography that exists in the market with a backstory suggests that sexual violence and gruesome sexual violence at times is what turns a woman into a homosexual. So she is born a heterosexual woman, but this traumatic incidents which occurred to her turns her into a homosexual. So she cannot be born instinctively as one. The entire psychological crisis is presented in the form of a simplified twist. That unwanted penetration and the disgust generated from it is what leads to a turning to the softer, receptive feminine sex. This is precisely because ideologically the feminine self is constricted with love and care and sacrifice. At the end of the film, when it is finally revealed that Tanya is indeed a lesbian, the scene preceding that is Sapna actually trying to say the word and failing miserably because it is such a shameful word. It cannot be said by people. And when the word is finally used, it is used by Tanya herself. It is made to sound like the dirtiest word ever, an abominable abnormality. There is nothing natural about it. Tanya is a lesbian because she is a man trapped in a woman's body, or simply because of her past unsatisfactory sexual experiences masquerading as trauma. Because it is common practice even now to rape or gang rape lesbians to drive them to normalcy. Because what is sex if your vagina is not being violated? Why should it ever be equated with pleasure? And how dare women whom their pleasure vis-a-vis their own bodies. Now, there are deeper undertones here. Tanya's mother's death, coupled with her rape, can be seen as a punishing mother who leaves her child in the face of danger. If you're aware, how do I say this? Like, this also has psychoanalytic bearings on it. So, when she grows up, the kind of bond that she shares with Sapna is almost reminiscent of a mother-child bond. The tenderness of love, the suckling, each seems to repeat and reiterate the mother-child relationship. Dwight says, and I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. So Dwight says, in their homosexual caresses, they derive gratification from especially the oral zone and the external genital organs. In this realm, that is the realm of physical love between women, there was no sign of masculine, feminine, no opposition of roles, but the antithesis between the active and the passive played an essential part. One received the impression that what made the situation so happy was precisely the possibility of playing both the parts. In this mother-child relationship, there is no third party. The father figure is absent. Now, the portrayal of same-sex relationship in this film is as generalized as it can possibly get. It portrays lesbians as psychotic, hysteric murderers. So when Tanya dies, and the poor woman dies a painful death, she's electrocuted and then she falls from a massive height, leaving her corpse mangled. It is as if the director was trying to deliberately preach that lesbians should be killed. Because they are unnatural, they are an abomination to the society, they are witches. They are witches who deserve to be burnt at the stake. And since Rahul is the ubiquitous macho Bollywood hero, it is he who is ultimately responsible for her death. And that is depicted, almost as a kind of retribution. In her death, this deviant woman finds retribution. What perhaps is the tragedy of the film is that it is ultimately Sapna who sends Tanya off to her violent death, because she only now cares for the man and the love that she has for this man, who has saved her from deviance and brought her back to life to fulfill her biological destiny. And since Tanya was beyond the point of saving, she must be eliminated for the maintenance of a properly functioning power structure in this patriarchal society. Here, the power dialectics function a little differently. Rahul is the problematic, heterosexual, normative, homophobic hero who must save the damsel in distress, Sapna, cure her from any deviance whatsoever. He must save her from Tanya, excuse me. I'm not used to talking for such long times. So, he must save Sapna from Tanya, who is sick, because she is aware of her sexuality. She must be taught a lesson, and that lesson is death. A bisexual woman is cured and brought back to the side of heterosexuality, where she would go on to fulfill her role of being a progenitor and someone's wife. Hence, Sapna can be perceived as an intermediary, a type of homosexual woman who keep their interest in men, but they cannot stop complaining about it. And this is precisely, how we meet Sapna in the beginning of the film, who confides to Rahul, and who is not confides, but she almost seems to boast that how frequently would she and Tanya beat up lecherous men. There is male fantasy operating within the paraphernalia of popular culture, which dictates that female friendship has overt sexual undertones, and even though it is perceived lustfully and is considered desirable voyeuristically, it cannot be allowed to flourish normally within the greater parameter of the society. The words which are repeatedly used for Tanya by Rahul are pati, which means husband, premi, lover, sahela, which is a female friend acting as a male one. This film unwillingly and unwittingly seems to uphold the Foucauldian tripartite sense of taboo, non-existence, and silence. Now, finally, coming to the last film of today's discussion, that is Ek Ladki Ko Dekha To Aisa Laga. It was recently released just last February, that is last year's February. It garnered positive reviews, and it came after India's decriminalization of homosexuality. Article 377 was abolished on 6th September 2018. Many people considered it to be a historic ruling, and rightly so. It gathered mass support, especially on social media, and there was a hashtag which trended for months and months. Love is love. Of course, the article only speaks about sex, and love and sex are only imagined to be interchangeable for the sake of the autonomy of patriarchy. But nevertheless, this film was lauded for its attempt at sensitizing an already sensitive issue and for being extremely compassionate in the treatment. I mean, look at the poster, it is all hearts. It's literally all hearts. Now, Sweetie, played by Sonam Kapoor, is a young girl who realizes very early on in her childhood itself that she only likes girls in school and lives throughout her school life being shunned by her classmates who consider her abnormal. She's a motherless child. She's in love with her school best friend until she realizes that her love shall never be reciprocated because that girl, her friend, is straight. She grows up feeling lost and disdain until she meets Pooh and properly falls in love and dreams of moving to London to be close to her. Her plans are thwarted by her older brother Bablu. He's tyrannical and through the flashback sequences is proved to be a staunch homophobic and a bully. There is a sense of unknown fear that looms every time Sweetie and Bablu are on the same screen. They are sharing screen space and screen time. There is almost a sense of foreboding. Every time he tries to threaten his sister, every time he tries to coax or cajole his sister, there is that sense of foreboding. What is going on in Bablu's mind, we never find out. There is that almost, hint of that societal truth. And if it had not been this film, if it had not been released under the banner of Vidhu Vinod Chopra, and if it had been a film made on the margins, perhaps this societal truth would have been incorporated, something I've already talked about, that how lesbians even now are often commissioned to be raped by their family members because they think that it is a disease which can be cured by penetrative sex. But that is never shown in this film because clearly Ek Ladki Ko Dekha To Aisa Laga is a mainstream Hindi family film. You can watch it with your family and not feel too uncomfortable. So the film definitely tries to, tickle at those places of discomfort, but it never does what Fire did. It never does what Girlfriend does. It never titillates you, or it never even makes you really uncomfortable. And of course, it was released at a time when it has been normalized. We have pride marches now. So now, okay.
Medhasree,
Yes.
Samman here. I just want to say that maybe we are running out of time, so maybe
Yes,
you can
I
wrap
have
it up.
just one thing, a couple of things more. I have just 2 slides basically, and then we
Okay,
can wrap
so if you can wrap it up briefly, so we can take a few questions that has been asked in the comments, I think.
Okay, definitely, yes. So Kuhu's romance with Sweetie is extremely idyllic. It is very innocent. They love each other. The film becomes a mouthpiece for the hashtag love is love. There is hardly any sexual overtone that can be found. And like Fire, the film ends on a positive note. That Sweetie is allowed to be with Kuhu in the end. However, through the active intervention of her father who wants to see his child happy. So this film simultaneously endeavors to smash patriarchy while showcasing the biggest cliche that women can only assert their own independence if a man would let her. Her extremely patriarchal grandmother, who is always supportive of her grandson, who is overdosed with machismo, always rules her own son with an iron determination at his deviance because Anil Kapoor, who plays the father, he loves to cook. Now, the film ends with a very important message because it is also a very important film because it moves away from overtly sexualizing homosexuality and does the bare minimum. It presents people as people. And this is what the film ends with. I am as different from you as you are from me, and that places us at the same starting point. So we shall ride together through this beautiful journey of life with compassion, understanding, acceptance, and most importantly, love. I would just like to conclude with my final thoughts about the paper is that patriarchy has always functioned through aestheticization and sentimentalization of its politics, and this is perhaps vividly presented in the portrayal of same-sex relationships in the mainstream media, especially through these films. One interesting aspect of India's depiction of homosexuality is the stance which it accepts when it comes to portrayal of gay relationships or just men. They are still presented with a dash of effeminacy, as if men must be womanly and only womanly to like another man, and needless to say, they must be physically weak, they must be open to harm. But when it comes to women, it goes a step further by incorporating aggression, violence, by cutting out that lesbian relationships are a lot like their heteronormative counterparts. There is a man and a woman functioning within the woman-woman relationship, thus it too becomes a power play and not a conjugation of equal. But that is politics of power struggle, and everywhere it still must prevail. And what had begun with fire and acute trying to understand that women find some completion finally in ek ladki ko dekha to aisa laga, at least in being sensible enough to treat sexuality with the same mind that human beings should be treated. But Indian society and media still definitely have a long way to go in accurate portrayal of lesbian relationships, where it stems as natural and continues as natural without having to resort to transvestism or failed psychological development. Thank you. Okay. I have finished, Shamanda.
Thank you, Medhasree, for that beautiful presentation, and I'm so sorry for getting your name incorrect. Uh, Now, I would like to request Mr. Samman Roy to take over the presentation from here and say a few words. Thank you.
Shamanta, your mic is muted.
Am I audible right now?
Yeah, you're audible. Please go on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't have a lot to say. Whatever Medhasree said, she beautifully uh, presented how over the past couple of decades, Indian film has maybe grown from strength to strength. Maybe in the 90s, there were still films like Fire, which were trying to uh, take a contemplative look, or maybe try to dig in the psychology of uh, some characters which were not so common in mainstream cinema at that point of time. And maybe in the uh, decade after that, we didn't find such voices. But over the past uh, 8 to 10 years, I think there have been films which have tried to explore these subjects more sensitively, and uh, didn't try to appropriate things to according to the taste of what we call the mainstream audience, but actually tried to understand characters in their uh, like the headspace of their characters honestly. Like I remember seeing a film called Unfreedom, which was maybe released 6 to 7 years back. So there, apart from having other narratives, one of the narratives uh, focused on lesbian relationship between two women, which was, I think, handled or depicted much more sensibly than what was done in films like Girlfriend, and I don't
Yes.
remember more examples of those, but Unfreedom was a better portrayal of the subject. And in recent times, in films like Nagar Kirtan, or I don't know how many of you have seen a short film called Miss Man, which has been doing the rounds of festivals. for the past 6 to 7 months. So the upcoming filmmakers are trying to uh, take a deeper look and trying to take a more sensitive look at this subject. The word queer, I think, is a very uh, derogatory word which is used in this context, because the etymology of the word queer is strange or something which is not in vogue or something which is obtuse or not in common.
I would just like to interrupt Shamanda. The word queer is never taken with a negative connotation when we are talking about it in gender studies. It is a very positive term. Even as a heterosexual woman, a straight woman, I can also identify myself as queer, because being queer means when you are standing in opposition to everything that the norm dictates. And people who are an avid part of the pride community, they actually associate the queer with the highest positive sort of connotation. So it has never really been a negative word for them.
No, what I meant to say is the origin of the word was to marginalize people, but the community has taken it on a positive stride and tried to change the notions which had been different for I don't know how many years now. So overall, I think in films at least we are seeing much more progressive ideas or takes in same-sex relationships or uh, queer relationships, so to say, in Indian films as well as in foreign films. Like I remember a French film called "Blue is the Warmest Color," or "The Portrait of a Lady on Fire," which released maybe a couple of years back. So these subjects are being handled with more sensitivity than what it used to be, I think. So I'm not an expert on the subject, but I was very educated by whatever Medhashree told in her presentation. So I think that's all I have to say right now. Maybe we can take a few questions if someone have asked in the comment section. Check.
Are there questions?
Yeah, I think there is a question which says, do you think fluidity of gender is taken into consideration while working on films?
First of all, I think fluidity of gender might be taken into consideration by the new age filmmakers, by people who are making films now. Perhaps not really so much in mainstream media, but definitely in the niche media. But because I start my paper from the mid 90s, back then there was no concept that was prevalent in Indian society which would be fluidity of gender. Now I think the mediascape and the mindset of people is drastically changing at a snail's pace, but it's changing nonetheless. So yes, I think the fluidity of gender is being taken into consideration little by little.
Okay, there's another question which says, do you think the concept of patriarchy is into play in the film एक लड़की को देखा तो ऐसा लगा, where it
Yes,
ends?
I definitely think that एक लड़की को देखा तो ऐसा लगा, like I said, that it's a film which does not really puts you out of your comfort zone, and the reason why it never puts you out of your comfort zone is because it's extremely patriarchal. The father steps in to save the daughter. The daughter wants to get married to this guy because she thinks that she'll be able to adjust. Everywhere we have these tropes of patriarchy coming in, and uh, yes, it never steps out. It never steps out from even it tries very hard to show that they are trying to smash patriarchy, but it never does. So, and the only reason, the film is so well received by everyone is because it is patriarchal.
May I interrupt once, Shamanda? I think there is another question in the chat box. It's from
Okay.
Nobodita Ganguly. Yeah. Hello, ma'am. What do you think about drag representation in Bollywood?
Um, well, first of all, I don't think that, if we really look at how drag functions in queer studies, have we really had any films to showcase drag? I am yet to find that out. So I think it is extremely marginalized. There is hardly any presentation, let alone representation. I'm not sure if it answers your questions though.
So, may I ask Medhasree, will you recommend a few films which you thought have handled this issue, which you might recommend to others? Some of the Indian films, apart from the ones you have already talked about, which has portrayed same-sex relationships in the
Well,
most.
Margarita with a straw does it with a lot of compassion, and the recent release, Shubh Mangal Syada Savdhan, it tries to put a hilarious spin on it and succeeds to a very large extent. The thing about mainstream Indian media and same-sex relationship is that it has changed, because back when My Brother Nikhil was released, or even Mango Souffle, there was a lot of it was considered to be a deviance, it was considered to be something which caused AIDS. We are finally moving away from that. So I think that, and even with lesbianism and gay relations, there was so much of stereotypical representation. So the only thing that I found was worth a perfect representation when it came to showcasing the struggles a gay man goes through in coming out of the closet while being young, and understanding about it would be the web series Made in Heaven. I think that it beautifully showcases the pain, and what it does is that it does not tries to romanticize sex, because sex and love are interchangeable according to patriarchy. So Made in Heaven does not try to romanticize sex, especially gay sex, but it beautifully showcases the struggles of these people. So yeah, if anybody is willing to watch it, then they can.
Yeah, I would agree with that because what I found different in Made in Heaven was that uh, the Arjun Madhur's character was portrayed in a very matter of fact way without uh, emphasizing on the homosexual aspect of his character. So that
Yes.
was a pleasant departure from what we're used to seeing in
Yes,
Indian
because
films.
I believe what happens when portraying a straight man or a straight woman is that they're people first and then their sexuality comes to define them. But when it comes to talking about people on the spectrum, especially people who are into same sex relationships, we take into account their sexuality first, and then we take into account them, their being people, if that makes sense.
So basically, the writers are to blame, maybe. While
Maybe.
writing it, they have in their mind that they have to project a character based on their sexual orientation.
But
That is a
it's,
flaw
I
in
believe that
writing, I
it's
think.
also the same with us and how we, deal with people who are into same-sex relationships. Because even for us, when if we have a friend who is a gay or a lesbian, we introduce them, and I think we do it unconsciously, but we still do it, and we say, "This is my friend such and such," and then there's a subtext which says, he's gay or she's a lesbian. So it's always there. So how far can the writers be really blamed? Because with straight people, I would never introduce a friend of mine and say, hey, this is my friend and she's straight. Because it naturally goes without saying that she must be straight. But if I have a gay acquaintance, I would have to be, what, he's gay. I mean, we don't do it all the time, but it's still there.
Yeah, true. And maybe what you're talking about is still prevalent in educated metropolitan societies. Outside cities, in rural areas, maybe the stigma is still more prevalent, and the gaze is still what it used to be. So maybe we still have a long way to go, but I would think that Made in Heaven is kind of India's watershed moment in
Yes.
exploring what Philadelphia did with American movies, at least I think. So, any more questions are left? Can someone just check? I think we have covered most of the questions.
Hello, am I
Yeah,
audible?
please go ahead. Yeah,
Yeah,
please go ahead.
একটা একটু কন্ট্রোভার্সিয়াল মানে মোরালেস একটু প্রশ্ন করতে চাই মেধাশ্রী দিকে। এটা আমি একটু জানতে চাই যে মানে আমি যখন অটম সোনাটা দেখেছিলাম, হ্যাঁ, যে মানে এটা বলা হয় যে ঋতুপর্ণ সেনগুপ্ত 19 এপ্রিল তৈরি করেছিল, হয়তো সেটা থেকে ইন্সপায়ার্ড
ঋতুপর্ণ
হয়ে।
ঘোষ।
হ্যাঁ, এখানে যে মা মেয়ের যে কনভারসেশন, যেই কনভারসেশনটা আমরা দেখছি আর কি, একদিকে অপর্ণা সেনার আর ওইদিকে আমরা ওনার নামগুলো খেয়াল নেই, যাই হোক। তো এই যে ঠিক আছে, যাই হোক, তো এই যে কনভারসেশনের মধ্যে যে জিনিসপত্রগুলো ফুটে উঠছে, আমরা দেখছি যে ব্যক্তি জীবনের যে সমস্ত সমস্যা বা মানসিক মানে এই ব্যাপারগুলো, আমি এখানটায় শুধুমাত্র ক্লারিফাই মানে নিজেকে করতে চাই যে এটা কি আদৌ মানে আমাদের ক্ষেত্রে একটা বলা হয় ইডিপাস কমপ্লেক্স কাজ করে, সেটার সাথে এর কোনো যোগসূত্র নেই, কিন্তু এই যখন এই কমপ্লেক্স একটা রিলেশনশিপটা আমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছি, যেটা খুব মানে বেশি করে মানে অনেক জায়গাতেই হয়তো রেলেভেন্ট, সেখানে কি এইটা কখনো কাজ করতে পারে? মানে সেটা বাবা ছেলের মধ্যে হতে পারে, মা মেয়ের মধ্যে হতে পারে, যে একটা সাবকনশিয়াস মাইন্ডে এই যে মানে হোমোসেক্সুয়ালিটি যে ব্যাপারটা, সেটা থেকে যেন আমি মানে আমি পাইনি, সুতরাং আমার অমুকও পাবে না, বা আমাদের মধ্যে যে ব্যাপারটা থাকছে সেটা যেন মানে আমি হয়তো অতটা ভালো করে বোঝাতে পারছি না, কিন্তু বিষয়টা এইভাবে যে এই কমপ্লেক্সিটিটা, এটা নিয়ে কি তুমি মানে একটুখানি বলবে, এটা কি আদৌ মানে সম্ভব? এটা আমার মানে মনে হয় খুব সবসময় যখনই আমি রিওয়াচ করি অটম সোনাটা, এটা নিয়ে যদি একটু বলো।
আমি ঠিক প্রশ্নটা বুঝতে পারলাম না, মানে যদি আমি বুঝে থাকি প্রশ্নটা কি এই যে ইডিপাল কমপ্লেক্স এক্সিস্ট করে কিনা, ইজ দ্যাট দ্য কোয়েশ্চেন?
কমপ্লেক্সের ক্ষেত্রে তো ব্যাপারটা একদমই আলাদা। আমি ইডিপাস কমপ্লেক্সটা এই জন্যই বললাম যে এক্ষেত্রে যেমন মানে আমাদের মানে মা ছেলে বা বাবা মেয়ে, এক্ষেত্রে ব্যাপারটা যেমন চলে আসে, মানে আমরা ইডিপাস সেক্সিয়া দেখেছিলাম। আমি এটা শুধু এই অটম সোনাটা রেফারেন্স আনার জন্যই বললাম, যেহেতু ওনারা দুজন মা মেয়ে ছিলেন, হ্যাঁ, কিন্তু ওদের মধ্যে যে কমপ্লেক্সিটিটা, এই যেটা আমরা বারবার মানে দেখতে পাচ্ছি, সেই কমপ্লেক্সিটির মধ্যে এটা কি কখনো থাকতে পারে সে একটা মানে
সেক্সুয়াল আন্ডারটোনের কথা বলছো হয়তো।
সেক্সুয়াল আন্ডারটোনের কথা
না, সেক্সুয়াল আন্ডারটোন ঠিক নয়, কিন্তু এইটা একটা সাবকনশিয়াস মাইন্ডে এইটা খেলা করা, যে যে মানে এই কমপ্লেক্সিটিটা, যে মানে আমাদের মধ্যে এটা আমি হয়তো প্রশ্নটা ঠিকঠাক ভাবে বোঝাতে পারছি না, কিন্তু এইটা আমি জানতে তো চাই যে এদের মধ্যে যে কমপ্লিকেশনস গুলো থাকছে, সেই কমপ্লিকেশনস গুলো কি সামহাউ কোনো সেক্সুয়াল কনোটেশনের দিকে যায়? মানে
হ্যাঁ অ্যাকচুয়ালি যাই, আমি বুঝতে পেরেছি তুমি কি বলছো। ব্যাপারটা হচ্ছে গিয়ে যে আমি যদিও সত্যি কথা বলতে ফ্রয়েডের সব কথার সাথে তো এগ্রি করি না, কিন্তু কেউই করে না, কিন্তু উনি যেটা বলে গেছেন সেটা কিছুটা হলেও সত্যি, আর সত্যি বলেই হয়তো এতগুলো বছর পরেও সেটাকে আমরা এতটা we take it into consideration। সেটা হচ্ছে গিয়ে যে এভরিথিং বিগিনস এন্ড এন্ডস উইথ লিবিডো, সমস্ত কিছুই তো শেষ পর্যন্ত সেক্সুয়ালিটিতে গিয়ে এবং সেক্সে গিয়ে শেষ হয়। তো সেখান থেকে দেখতে গেলে একটা বাচ্চার প্রথম যাই সেক্সুয়াল এক্সপিরিয়েন্স হোক না কেন, তার যাই অ্যাট্রাকশন হোক না কেন, দ্যাট ইজ ডেফিনেটলি টুয়ার্ডস দ্য প্যারেন্টস। এবং that is definitely carried forward to their entire adult lives. And if you really want to understand how this um, you know figure of the absent parent plays a huge role in a child's life, then please read Laka's what Laka has to say on it, because I am not that qualified enough to talk about Laka, but that is the best way I can define it. That yes, it is 100% there. এই কমপ্লেক্সিটি গুলো বাবা মার সঙ্গে ডেফিনেটলি থাকে এবং সেই গুলো অনেক বেশি লেয়ার্ড ওয়েতে আই গেস প্রেজেন্টেড হয়। অটম সোনাটা আমি পার্সোনালি এখনো দেখিনি, তাই জন্য আমি সত্যিই হয়তো রিলেট করতে পারলাম না কোয়েশ্চেনটার সাথে অতটা, কিন্তু কোয়েশ্চেনটা সারমর্মটা যদি কিছুটা বুঝে থাকি তাহলে আমার উত্তরটাই।
আই থিঙ্ক অটম সোনাটার ব্যাপারে উনি বললেন, তার কারণ হচ্ছে অটম সোনাটার থেকে ঋতুপর্ণ ঘোষের 19 এপ্রিল অনেকটাই ইনফ্লুয়েন্স বলে সবাই।
19 এপ্রিল দেখেছি এবং যাই হোক।
আচ্ছা, আরেকটা কোয়েশ্চেন এসেছে, শুভঙ্কর কিছু বললে ইউ ক্যান গো হেড।
না না, আমি জাস্ট বলছিলাম মেধাশ্রী, এটা মানে খুব বিউটিফুল একটা সেশন ছিল, থ্যাঙ্কস আ লট।
থ্যাংক ইউ সো মাচ। আমি প্রচন্ড ভয়ে ছিলাম সত্যি কথা বলতে গেলে, ইট ওয়াজ মাই ফার্স্ট সেশন।
Okay, so there's another question. Simran Biswas has asked, do you think in Girlfriend it's not just about a homosexual is doomed, but also how a woman is vocal about her sexual desires must also be penalized?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not just about Girlfriend. It can be a heterosexual woman who is in tune with her feelings. She is doomed. Amra Nari Jati, if we ever can be vocal about sexual pleasure, sexual desire, needing sex, then yeah, we are all castigated. We are all conscripted. We should all be killed, beheaded, because women should always be subjugated. And we are not allowed to own our, you know, Helen Sizu has what she says, writing one's own body, writing through a woman's body, because women can only find their absolute sense of expression when they are in tune, when they are knowledgeable about their own body, about what gives them pleasure. Because language is inherently patriarchal. How do you find a niche? So every woman who has some recognition of a sexual desire is penalized. And I'm not even going to go into the whole academic perspective of it. Look around you, look at the society that we function with, at, in, and the answer is right there. The answer is right there in front of you. How do you, and by you I mean the entire society, perceive women who are vocal about her sexual desire? Isn't she always penalized?
I think Simran has got her answer. So there's another question I can see. Do the region matter in queer identity, like urban or rural? Does it matter when one deals with his or her queer identity?
To some extent, I should say yes, but because I think, and maybe this is just coming from my own place of privilege at being born and brought up in a metro and being heterosexual and heteronormative. But I think it should, because should বলাটা হয়তো একটুখানি বেশি বাড়াবাড়ি হয়ে যায়, but maybe it does, you know, maybe it does, because শহরে অনেক কিছু নিয়ে যেগুলো কথা বলা যায় হয়তো আমরা, maybe this is once again like I said, it's coming from a place of privilege, যে আমি শহরে বড় হয়েছি, হয়তো ওই জন্য আমি ভাবছি যে গ্রামের মানুষেরা they do not talk about it, or but I think that, you know, can you really come out of the closet if you are, say, you know, living in a very very একদম মানে যেটাকে বলে কি বলে সাদার মাথা এখন
conservative household or conservative environment,
রুরাল সোসাইটি, একদম যদি তুমি গন্ডগ্রাম যেটাকে আমরা খুব পাতি বাংলা ভাষায় বলি সেরকম জায়গাতে থাকলে, are you really allowed to be homosexual? You are. There are people, but you are. I can see a question, Shamanda. I can see it myself. If you have read erotic stories for Punjabi widows. No, I have not. I have not. I have to say this. I have not. But since you have mentioned it, I would definitely try to look it up and give it a read.
Okay, I think we have had a very productive session. We have got to learn a lot, and we have learned a lot from what Medhashree told us today. So I think we can wrap up today's session. If Protim or anyone will want to say the last few words, the concluding words.
Yes, thank you very much, Shamanda. Thanks a lot. And thank you, Medhasree, for this marvelous and very insightful session. Thank you for joining Calcutta Comparatists. And we have our next session on 6th October. We'll provide other details in our Facebook and WhatsApp groups. Stay tuned, all of you. Thank you and good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.